I remember sitting in my car after a conversation with someone I had known for years, someone close. I had just shared something that mattered to me deeply, a creative project I'd been working on quietly, behind the scenes, afraid but hopeful. Their response? A smirk, a few cutting words disguised as just being honest. And then came the phrase I still remember, even years later. You really think anyone's going to care about that? I laughed along, because that's what we do, right? We armor up, we pretend it didn't sting. But when I closed that car door, I felt it in my chest like a weight, not just disappointment, shame, doubt. That awful voice in your head that whispers, maybe they're right. What I've learned after years of research and honestly more than a few gut punch experiences is this. Some people don't want to see you rise, not because they're not worthy, but because they're terrified of what your rising says about their standing still. And if we don't name that dynamic, if we don't understand how it works, we'll internalize it. We'll start to think our light is too much, that our ideas are too big, that our dreams are unrealistic. So today, I want to talk about why that happens, how it affects us more deeply than we realize, and how we can stand tall, speak truth, and keep rising anyway. Some people criticize because they're in pain, not because you're wrong. Really, unlearn was that not all criticism is a reflection of me. It's not always about something I did wrong or something I need to fix. Sometimes it's a reflection of someone else's pain, their disappointment, their fear. Now, don't get me wrong, feedback is a gift. Constructive, thoughtful feedback from people who love you and want to see you grow, that's gold. But there's a difference between feedback that builds and criticism that wounds. And I think many of us were never taught how to tell the difference. I used to take everything personally, every raised eyebrow, every dismissive tone, every time someone offered a just trying to help comment that actually felt like a tiny paper cut to the soul. And because I'm wired to want connection, as we all are, I'd try to earn their approval. I'd dial myself down, shrink a little, make myself more palatable. But here's what research and experience has shown me. When someone constantly puts you down, it's rarely because you're too much. It's often because your light shines on the parts of them they haven't yet healed. There's a term in psychology called projection. It's when someone takes the feelings they can't face within themselves and places them on someone else. So if someone's insecure about their own capabilities, they might mock yours. If they've been silenced, they might try to silence you. And they might not even realize they're doing it. That doesn't excuse it, but it helps explain it. Understanding this changed everything for me, not because it stopped the criticism, but because it stopped me from absorbing it as truth. There's a story I always think of when this topic comes up. A woman came up to me after a talk and said, I've got a sister who always brings me down. Every time I talk about something I'm proud of, she says something to cut it in half. I used to think she was just keeping me grounded, but now I think she might be keeping me small. That's it right there. That's the tension. We confuse negativity with honesty. We confuse constant criticism with caring. But people who truly care about us don't tear us down to keep us humble. They celebrate us while holding us accountable with love. When someone lashes out or diminishes you, the question becomes, what are they afraid of? Afraid of your growth, afraid of losing connection if you change, afraid of facing their own unfulfilled potential, and more importantly, what are you making it mean about you? We need to stop internalizing other people's pain as evidence of our flaws. Because the truth is, you can be doing everything right, aligned, brave, honest, and still make someone uncomfortable simply by being you. So the next time someone tries to bring you down, pause and ask yourself, is this about me or is this about something in them that hasn't been healed yet? That question alone can give you the distance you need to stand your ground and keep your light on. Emotional boundaries are acts of compassion, not walls. I used to think boundaries were about pushing people away, that they were this harsh, cold thing people put up when they were angry or detached. Like, I'm done with you. Stay out of my life. That was the picture in my head when I heard the word boundary. A concrete wall, maybe even barbed wire, something that made relationships feel more distant. But that's not what boundaries really are, not healthy ones. What I've come to understand, and what the research backs up, is that boundaries are not about separation. They're about clarity. and clarity is kindness. I had to learn this the hard way, through exhaustion, resentment, and a whole lot of pretending I was okay when I wasn't. I'd say yes when I meant no. I'd show up even when my tank was on empty, and then I'd wonder why I felt anxious, depleted, and sometimes even a little bitter. But the truth is, I wasn't setting boundaries because I was afraid of disappointing people. I thought if I kept being accommodating, I'd finally earn the love and approval I was craving. But here's the thing, when we consistently abandon ourselves to please others, we don't earn love. We earn resentment, ours and theirs, because eventually it leaks out. We get snappy, passive-aggressive, or withdrawn, and then we blame them for not knowing where the line was when we never actually drew it. Boundaries at their core are simply this: what's okay and what's not okay. That's it. That simple. And when we don't communicate that clearly, kindly, and consistently, we're not being honest, not with them and not with ourselves. I remember working with someone who told me, I feel like if I set boundaries, I'll seem selfish. And I looked at her and said, you're not being selfish, you're being responsible for your emotional well-being. What I love about boundaries is that they don't require the other person to change. They require you to be clear on what you need to stay emotionally safe and whole. That's powerful. You can't control how people react to your boundaries, but you can choose to honor yourself regardless of their response. In fact, one of the most compassionate things we can do for our relationships is to be honest about our limits. Why? Because resentment is the enemy of connection. And when we're saying yes, when we mean no, when we're letting comments slide that actually cut deep, we're not building connection, we're eroding it. So many of us were taught that love means saying yes to everything, but real love, the deep, sustainable kind, requires truth. And truth without boundaries becomes blurry. It becomes performative. You can't be authentic while constantly betraying your own emotional needs. The more I practiced boundary setting, the more I noticed something surprising. I didn't lose connection. I gained it. Not with everyone, of course. Some people fell away when I stopped overgiving, but the relationships that remained, they got deeper, more honest, more respectful. So if you've been afraid to draw a line, let me tell you, boundaries aren't barriers. They're bridges. Bridges between your values and your relationships. And building them lovingly and firmly is one of the kindest things you can do for yourself and for the people who truly want to walk beside you. You don't owe anyone access to your vulnerability. One of the biggest myths we carry, especially for trying to live authentically, is that being vulnerable means being open with everyone. That if we're really brave, we'll just lay our hearts bare for anyone who asks. But here's what I've learned, both through research and personal bruising. Vulnerability is not oversharing. It's not dumping your soul out on the table and hoping someone's kind enough to pick it up gently. Vulnerability is intentional. It's earned. It's deeply courageous, but it also requires discernment. There's this idea floating around that transparency equals strength, that if we're strong, we'll tell everyone everything. But the truth is, vulnerability without boundaries isn't bravery, it's exposure. And when we expose ourselves to the wrong people, people who haven't shown us they're capable of holding our stories with care, we risk injury, emotional injury. And for some of us, those wounds go all the way back. I remember once sharing something personal with someone I wanted to trust. I hoped they would meet me with empathy, maybe some encouragement. Instead, they made a joke, lighthearted, maybe even well-intended, but it stung. And in that moment, I realized, just because someone is close to you doesn't mean they're safe for your vulnerability. We're hardwired for connection. That's not up for debate. But connection doesn't mean access. You can love people, support them, even share parts of your life with them, and still protect the sacred parts of your story. In the research, what consistently shows up is that trust isn't built in grand gestures. It's built in small moments. Someone remembers your kid's name. They check in after a hard day. They don't interrupt when you're sharing something raw. They don't weaponize your words later. And when those little moments of trust stack up, then and only then do they earn the right to witness your vulnerability. Think about that. Your vulnerability is a privilege, not a public service. When we open ourselves up too quickly, especially to people who haven't earned that space, we're often met with discomfort, judgment, or minimization. And then we start questioning ourselves. We think maybe we're too much or that our feelings aren't valid, but really, we just shared the right story with the wrong person. This isn't about being closed off. It's not about building walls or keeping people at arm's length. It's about knowing that the most tender parts of your soul deserve to be met with care, not criticism. And until someone shows you that they can sit with your vulnerability without trying to fix it, minimize it, or shift the spotlight back onto themselves, they haven't earned that space. When you start seeing your vulnerability as sacred, not something to be hidden, but something to be honored, your whole approach to relationships changes. You stop performing and start discerning. You stop leaking pain and start sharing with intention. And that shift doesn't just protect your heart. It strengthens your connection with the people who truly see you. You are not obligated to bleed for people who would never bandage your wounds. You are allowed to keep parts of yourself safe. That's not self-protection out of fear. It's self-respect, rooted in wisdom. Gaslighting and minimizing are red flags, not challenges to overcome. There's a moment, maybe you've had one, when you leave a conversation thinking, was it really that bad? Maybe I am overreacting. Maybe I'm just being too sensitive. If that sounds familiar, I want you to hear me clearly. You're not being too sensitive. What you're feeling is emotional invalidation. And when it happens consistently, especially from someone close, it doesn't just confuse you, it makes you question your reality. Gaslighting isn't always this overt manipulative scheme that looks like it came out of a movie. Sometimes it's subtle. It shows up in everyday language, phrases like "that never happened," "you always make things bigger than they are," or "wow, you're so dramatic." You bring up how something made you feel, and instead of being heard, you're dismissed or redirected. And over time, those little moments chip away at your trust, not just in them, but in yourself. What the research tells us is that emotional invalidation over time leads to a deep erosion of self-esteem. It doesn't happen all at once. It happens slowly, quietly, like a leak in the roof you don't notice until the ceiling starts to sag. You stop trusting your gut. You start second-guessing your memories, your reactions, your needs. You begin to believe that maybe your feelings are too much, that maybe you are the problem. And that is incredibly painful. I remember having a conversation with someone I deeply cared about. I brought up something they said that had hurt me, not to attack, just to name it and hopefully move forward with more understanding. But instead of empathy or curiosity, I was met with laughter. "You're seriously upset about that?" they said, and then you always find something to complain about. That moment didn't just sting, it silenced me. And that's what gaslighting and minimizing do. They teach you not to speak up. They train you to abandon your own emotional truth for the sake of keeping the peace. But that peace comes at a cost, and the cost is you. Here's what I know now. When someone repeatedly denies your lived experience, that's not love, that's control. And when someone regularly makes you feel like your feelings are wrong, that's not you being fragile. That's them being unwilling to be accountable. We can have hard conversations, we can disagree, we can even mess up and get it wrong because we're human. But when there's care, those moments come with repair, with curiosity, with "help me understand how that landed for you," not with defensiveness, not with erasure. The people in your life who are safe won't need you to shrink your feelings to fit their comfort. They'll want to understand even when it's uncomfortable. They'll choose connection over ego, and if someone repeatedly chooses their pride over your pain, that's not a relationship you need to fix. It's a pattern you need to name. So the next time someone tries to tell you your pain isn't real, remember this: your feelings are data. They're not always the full story, but they are part of the story, and they matter. You matter. Protecting your peace isn't selfish, it's a sacred responsibility. There's this moment in life, sometimes quiet, sometimes messy, when you realize that your energy, your time, your emotional safety, they're not infinite. You start to feel the cost of constantly trying to please, fix, explain, absorb. And if you're like many of us, that moment doesn't come with a loud declaration. It comes with exhaustion, resentment, that quiet voice inside saying, something has to change. And that's the moment where protecting your peace stops being a luxury and becomes a necessity. I used to think peace was something that just happened, something you either had or didn't, depending on the season of life or the people around you. But what I've learned and what I've seen over and over again in the research is that peace isn't passive, it's active. It's not something you stumble into, it's something you build and guard, intentionally, bravely, sometimes at the risk of disappointing others. For a long time, I confused being loving with being available all the time. I believed that being a good person meant saying yes, being there, understanding, even when I was running on fumes. But here's the hard truth. When we stretch ourselves too thin for others, we eventually snap. And no one gets the best of us when we're depleted. Not our partners, not our kids, not our friends, not ourselves. Protecting your peace means getting really honest about what drains you and what fills you. It means noticing how you feel after the conversation ends, not just during it. Do you feel seen? Do you feel smaller? Do you feel uplifted or quietly ashamed? These questions matter because they tell you everything you need to know about whether someone is nourishing your soul or siphoning your spirit. Sometimes the people who challenge your peace the most are the ones closest to you, and that's what makes this hard. We feel guilty, we feel selfish, but here's what I want you to hear. You can love someone deeply and still recognize that their energy is not good for your nervous system. That truth can live alongside compassion. You can wish them well and still step back. Boundaries don't mean you don't care. They mean you care enough to be honest about what you can and can't hold. I once heard someone say, you don't have to attend every argument you're invited to. And I'd add, you don't have to stay in every dynamic that pulls you away from your wholeness. Sometimes protecting your peace looks like not engaging. Sometimes it's silence. Sometimes it's distance. And sometimes it's just a gentle but firm no without a 20-minute explanation. Here's the thing. Peace isn't just the absence of noise. It's the presence of alignment. It's waking up and not dreading the day. It's being able to exhale in your own life. That kind of peace is sacred, and you are the guardian of it. So no, you're not selfish for choosing peace. You're wise. You're paying attention. You're saying, I deserve a life that doesn't feel like a constant emotional negotiation. And that, my friend, is not just brave, it's revolutionary. Here's what I want to leave you with. Not everyone will understand your growth. Not everyone will clap when you set a boundary or choose peace over chaos. Some will call it selfishness, some will call it overreacting. And that's okay, because at the end of the day, you are the one living in your body, in your heart, in your truth. And you are called to protect the space where your courage lives. You don't have to carry what doesn't belong to you. You don't have to dim your light to keep others comfortable. And you don't have to stay small to keep someone else from feeling inadequate. What you do have to do, if you want a life that feels meaningful and whole, is listen to that inner voice, the one that whispers, this doesn't feel right, the one that nudges you to choose yourself even when it's scary, the one that knows when it's time to step back, stand tall, or walk away. Because here's the truth, you were never meant to shrink to be loved. You are meant to be real, and sometimes being real means disappointing people who were only comfortable with the version of you that stayed silent. So keep growing, keep setting boundaries, keep loving deeply, but not at the expense of your own soul. You're not too much, you're not too sensitive, you're becoming more you, and that's something worth protecting. Good luck out there. Be brave, be kind, and never apologize for honoring your peace. You've got this.